Age of Sigmar has a lot of factions, and I am making an introductory video for each of them to answer the question, should you play this faction? Today's video is covering the Slaves to Darkness faction. This is one of the most, if not the most popular faction in all of Age of Sigmar. A big part of this is due to the aesthetic of the Chaos Warriors and the Chaos Knights, as well as the incredible lore and incredible boss models that you can build. Slaves to Darkness covers a lot of different styles of models, and so there's something for everyone. Their rules are also very powerful, and at the time of filming are quite a competitive army on the table. Slaves to Darkness also has a lower skill floor than other factions, making it easier for a new player to play this army as their first army. The plan for this video is to break down common questions about the faction and where better to start than the playstyle of these Chaos Sworn Warriors. Slaves to Darkness is an elite faction. This means that overall they have higher cost units, and therefore you have a smaller army size overall. However, this higher cost is associated with elite stats. We'll talk more about what that looks like specifically later in the video, but basically your models in Slaves to Darkness are very strong. Slaves to Darkness excels at buffing up more and more as the game progresses and can really smash opponents in combat. If an opposing army isn't careful and moves too far up the battlefield, Slaves to Darkness can end the game in a single turn. Oftentimes, a Slaves to Darkness approach to playing a game is to Alpha Strike. This term means to attack immediately on the first turn and try to lock down your opponent's options on the battlefield and destroy them before they can fight back. Even when a Slaves to Darkness army doesn't Alpha Strike, they tend to play more aggressively to get the most out of their powerful stats. With less units, you also have less options to be technical and move around the map scoring points. Slaves to Darkness have a lot of buffs, which can provide increased movement, specifically increasing the distance that their units can charge. This can mean that they can close down a distance on the battlefield that another army might take several turns to cross. One thing to note is that Slaves to Darkness is not a shooting army, and while some units may have the odd ranged weapons, don't pick this army if you're expecting archers or artillery or other ranged attacks. Next, let's take a look at Slaves to Darkness models so you can see what type of themes you can take with this faction. The first subsection of models that we're going to talk about are the Dark Oath. So when the Age of Chaos started, the forces of order largely retreated to the realm of Azir. Many people gave in to the chaos, and many had already set off on their path to glory as a Chaos Warrior. But there are regular people in the mortal realms that survived the Age of Chaos without giving themselves wholly to it. And these are the Dark Oath tribes. You may look at them and say barbarians, but they're so much more nuanced than that. Each tribe has its own culture and rituals. These are humans that swear oaths to the dark gods but do not commit to any one deity, and this has kept them from mutating, whereas you might see a Chaos Warrior with horns. While the Dark Oath can become stronger by completing their oaths mid-game, they are basic humans. This will be apparent when you look at their stats, but also their points cost. If you were to build a large Slaves to Darkness army, it would be by building a Dark Oath force. Unfortunately, right now, this is not a super effective way to build a competitive list, so we don't see a lot of Dark Oath units in the meta. These are the newest Slaves to Darkness units, and they have some really cool sculpts with a ton of details to paint. The models include the Marauders, the Fell Riders, the Wilder Fiend, the Chieftain on horse, and more. Then we have the classic Chaos Warriors, the Knights, the Lords, the Sorcerers, the Chosen, the Chariot, the vanguard. These are your barbarians and tribesmen and any mortal that has fully devoted themselves to walking the path to glory. These warriors are often committed to a specific god and may have mutations to match. This commitment to chaos and to fighting has made them powerful beyond your typical mortal, and this is reflected in their stats but also their points values. These Chaos Warriors are the typical building blocks of any Slaves to Darkness army that you will see online. The ultimate goal for a Chaos Warrior is to ascend the ranks and eventually be transformed into a demon prince by their favored god. We also have monsters and demons in the Slaves to Darkness. We have the Demon Prince, the Fomoroid Crusher, the Mind Stealer Spyranx, the Mutalith Vortex Beast, and the Slaughter Brute. And then there are the big boss characters. For example, Archaon, the Ever-Chosen of Chaos. He serves all 5 Chaos gods but swears fealty to none of them. He leads his forces into battle and commands all of these Slaves to Darkness in the mortal realms. This is the most powerful character in the game, and his model is built to match. Running Archaon in your army will take up almost half of your total points, so keep that in mind before you invest in him. We also have Be'lakor, the Dark Prince, who is an undivided champion similar to Archaon. Be'lakor was the very first demon prince and has power to match. He is often described as the most powerful warscroll in Age of Sigmar, largely due to an ability that can fully shut off an enemy unit for a turn, interrupting vital movements and stopping your opponent from scoring points or counterattacking your forces. Abraxia is one of Archaon's most powerful servants that leads the vanguard, his most powerful knights, into battle. Abraxia is another high points boss model that isn't quite as expensive or as powerful as Archaon and Be'lakor, and right now we're not really seeing a lot of Abraxia, but she is the newest sculpt out of all of these bosses and looks incredible on the table, and it's certain that she will get her time to shine. Finally, we have the wizards, the Gaunt Summoners, and the Chaos Sorcerer Lords. Slaves of Darkness has some powerful spell lore, and incredibly potent wizards to take advantage of them. If you are hoping to cast magic in this army, you're going to have a few good choices of wizards that you can take, as well as Archaon and Be'lakor that can sling spells as well. The Gaunt Summoners are an interesting choice right now, as they can carry units in their ethereal silver towers and then summon them onto the battlefield to launch a surprise attack on your opponent. There are 4 Chaos Gods, at least if you're referring to the Slaves to Darkness faction abilities. The faction abilities for Slaves to Darkness are very thematic. They involve pledging your units to various gods and receiving buffs from those gods. The different buffs affect your offense, your defense, and mobility, and so you can make a decision mid-game depending on what you think you might need and then pledge your units to a particular god. Another one of the faction abilities allows you to take a hero in your army and ascend them to be a mighty demon prince mid-game, making them considerably more powerful. You also have options for battle formations in Slaves to Darkness. There's 4 different ones that allow you to tailor your playstyle even further. Some of the choices include increasing the control stat of your units to help them control objectives, to revive fallen Dark Oath warriors, to defile objectives to poison your enemies, and then to empower your demon princes to bid their allies to attack sooner. When talking about the model range for Slaves to Darkness, they most recently had an update right before the launch of 4th edition Age of Sigmar. This was the launch of the full Dark Oath line, and the Dark Oath may have these beautifully designed sculpts, but unfortunately they're very difficult to play right now with, the rules they have compared to the Elite Chaos Warriors, so we don't really see them as often. Slaves to Darkness also just received their 4th edition battletome at the end of 2024. This book included new faction rules and some updates to war scrolls, but nothing major. Because of these recent updates, we're not expecting Slaves to Darkness to receive anything new in 2025 and possibly longer, unless some kind of one-off hero or story character comes out, or maybe miniatures for another game like Warcry or Underworlds are released. In terms of difficulty to paint, Slaves to Darkness are one of the easier factions to paint. The Chaos Warriors have a lot of armor, and you can stick on a few colors if you want and it will look good. Any of the demons will take contrast paints very well, making easy work for a beginner. And the new Dark Oath models, they are smaller, they are more detailed than the older models in the faction, so they can be a little bit more challenging to paint, but overall, because this is a grimy faction that thrives in battle, you don't have to be as clean with your paint jobs, and you can get away with more mud or blood spatters when you're painting. As always, there are exceptions to what I'm saying. There are some incredible centerpiece models to paint in Slaves to Darkness like Archaon and Be'lakor. However, overall, this is one of the easier factions for a new painter to try out. We can talk about the army size for Slaves to Darkness, and aside from the Dark Oath units, the Slaves to Darkness is an elite faction like I referenced earlier, and it means that you're just going to have fewer models in your army than your opponents, but those models are going to be stronger. Competitively, this means you have choice of first turn most of the time because you're going to finish deploying more quickly than your opponent. If you really wanted to go large army, then you could do so with Dark Oath units, and you'll have way more models on the table than you would have otherwise, but like I said, right now that's not looking as competitive as the Chaos Warriors. We can also talk about the price of the army, and because Slaves to Darkness has some higher cost units, it can be easier to build this army with less purchases than any other faction. That being said, if you really wanted to lean into Dark Oath units, like I said, that will take more purchases to fill out the whole army. So let's take a look at a few example army lists from some other tournaments that I found on warhammer.com and how much they cost. The first one is from Cody Ray from the House of Heroes GT, and this is a 2-drop Slaves to Darkness list. There's very few models in this list. We have Be'lakor, the Dark Master, we have a Chaos Chosen, which is reinforced, so that's 2 boxes, and then Chaos Furies, which I believe actually come in one box. The Exalted Hero of Chaos as a hero, a Chaos Sorcerer Lord, a Chaos Chosen, again reinforced, and then the Nexus Chaotica terrain. So the total cost for this list is 669 USD, which is cheaper than any of the lists that I've looked at in the other videos in this series. We also have Carson Whitlock at the Richmond Reroll GT, which is one of my friendly local gaming stores that I went out to recently for the very first time and had an absolute blast. And he's running a list that is a single drop, so it only has one regiment. And it has Bellicor, like we saw before, the Chaos Chosen, the Turnus, the Blade of the First Prince, Mutilith Vortex Beast, the vanguard reinforced, so 2 boxes of them, and then the Nexus Chaotica. And this one comes in at $617.50 USD, making it relatively a cheap army to build. Now, there are examples of where you can build armies for cheaper if you were able to buy certain box sets, like for example, Osiarch Bone Reapers. If you bought a Spearhead and a Battle Force, which there are plenty in stock, you could build an army for much cheaper than this, but you'd have exactly that selection, whereas this is a competitive list that came in the top 3 at a tournament. We can also talk about army stats and what you can come to expect from different models in this army. So if we start with the Chaos Warriors, they on average will have a 5-inch move, a 3 up to save, and a 3 up to hit and wound, 1 rend, and 1 to 2 damage. These are some really elite stats. The movement is average, it's fine, but a 3 up to save is pretty tanky, and a 3 up to hit and wound is an over 50% chance for both of those stats. 1 rend is fine, it's not a lot, and then the damage is minimal there, but overall those are some really good stats. As you get into the Cavalry and the vanguard and some of the other, like the Chaos Chosen, they're going to have abilities that make them even more elite, things like Fight Twice, as well as charge bonuses, etc. And then you can buff them even further by having them pledged to certain gods and giving them buffs to different stats. The Dark Oath you're going to see are immediately less elite, so they still have that 5-inch move. That's a typical human move, but they have a 5 up save instead of a 3 up. They have a 4 to hit and a 3 to wound, so they have a worse to hit than the Chaos Warriors do. They typically have 0 to 1 rend and then 1 damage around, depending on which model we're looking at. So way less survivability and way less damage on the Dark Oath units. We also have many demons and monsters, and their move is variable. It depends if they have wings, how big they are, etc. But generally, you know, it's higher than the 5 inches that you'll see with these other models. They typically have a 4 up to hit, but a 2 up to wound, which is a pretty typical like monster, big, you know, lumbering person stat line. But then you get higher rends and higher damages for those higher point demons and monsters. Just more swingy damage, which is always really fun, except for when you have a few games in the row where you never get it. To sum it all up, Slaves to Darkness is a fast faction that loves getting into combat to fight it out. You have access to big charges and Fight Twice effects that can extend your range into your opponent's territory and take out their softer units. You have access to magic, big monsters, and mega boss characters, and if you want, you can even play the Horde style of army with the Dark Oath tribes working together to protect their lands and their ways of life. Hopefully that's enough information for you to decide whether Slaves to Darkness is the right faction for you. Army power levels change drastically with time, so I wouldn't use that as a reason to get into a faction, but that being said, Slaves to Darkness are a very stable faction to choose because of their elite stats. Their popularity in the game also means that Games Workshop is going to give them lots of support and models for you to enjoy because they know that they're going to sell. So let me know if you're going to be picking up any Slaves to Darkness miniatures, or if you already play Slaves to Darkness. And experienced players, feel free to share any details that I missed out that you want new players to know in the comments below.